camera fades from black. A woman's scream echoes, muffled, as though trapped in wood and earth. Then silence. The narrator's voice enters, low and steady. In the summer of 1864, in a small Kentucky town that no longer exists on any official map, 2 newborns were found abandoned at the edge of a swamp. Their bodies were twisted, their faces sunken, and their eyes, still open, were said to shine in the moonlight like glass. What no one dared record publicly was this: the twins were born to a brother and sister, bound not by love but by ambition. They married to preserve their land, their influence, and their bloodline. But what emerged from that union was something that defied nature. For decades, their story was erased from county records, buried in church archives, and hidden beneath layers of shame. And yet, traces remain in diaries, in forgotten sermons, in whispers passed down by those too afraid to write them aloud. Tonight, we exhume what was never meant to be spoken. The tale of the Weatherby family, their pact of power, and the children they sacrificed in the name of legacy. The Weatherbys were not poor farmers nor wandering settlers. They were landholders, descended from one of the earliest Virginia families, carrying both wealth and the weight of expectation. Their arrival in Kentucky was deliberate. Fertile ground, untouched woods, and a community eager to be led. James Weatherby, the elder, was ambitious, disciplined, and cold. His sister, Eleanor, was quieter, but no less calculating. When suitors threatened to divide the family's inheritance, James made a decision. They would marry not for love but for control. Their union was whispered about in hushed tones, but never confronted openly. The church, desperate to keep the Weatherbys as benefactors, chose silence over scandal. What mattered most was that the family continued to build schools, fund missions, and feed the poor. In public, the Weatherbys shone as pillars of order and morality. In private, their bond carried a darkness that would not remain hidden for long. The birth of their twins shattered the thin veil of respectability, and in the cries of those children, the town first heard the sound of something broken. It was said the twins were born under a moon that would not set, the night air thick and still as if the earth itself were watching. Midwives spoke of their skin, pale and bruised as though pressed from stone. Their limbs bent in unnatural ways, their eyes large, reflective, and empty. Some claimed they tried to wail, but the sound was closer to a rattling breath than a cry. The Weatherbys dismissed the women immediately, threatening them with ruin if a word escaped. But words always escape. Within days, whispers spread across the town. The children were a curse, the punishment of God for sins unspoken. James insisted the family line remain untouched, that the children would be hidden until they could be disciplined into silence. Eleanor, torn between maternal instinct and obedience, obeyed. The twins were moved into the basement of the Weatherby estate, where the windows were covered and the doors barred. The town did not see them again, but they were not forgotten. Children walking past the estate at night swore they heard scratching from beneath the floorboards. Others swore they saw pale fingers through cracks in the shutters. Whether truth or terror, the Weatherby twins became the town's nightmare, living reminders of a pact no one dared confront. By autumn, the town's ministers could no longer ignore the rumors. Parishioners whispered of strange cries, of lights flickering in the Weatherby home at odd hours. A visiting preacher from Lexington confronted James Weatherby directly. Days later, he vanished. His horse found grazing at the edge of the property. His Bible soaked in mud. The local church claimed he had returned home, though no such report exists. That silence was bought with coin. James donated a new bell tower, Eleanor supplied hymnals, and the scandal was smoothed into forgetfulness. Yet those who lived near the estate swore they heard the twins. Their voices were not words, but sounds low, droning notes that vibrated through walls like chants. Farmers said their livestock sickened when tethered near the property. Midwives who had delivered the twins left town entirely. One later found dead in the river. The official story was drowning. The unofficial one, whispered in kitchens late at night, was that she had been silenced for knowing too much. The Weatherby house itself became a monument to secrecy. Heavy curtains shut out the light. Servants were dismissed and replaced with men loyal only to James. The children, if they could be called that, remained unseen. Only Eleanor was permitted below, carrying trays of food and buckets of water. Neighbors wondered why her figure grew thinner, her complexion grayer. Some said she spent nights praying at the family cemetery, kneeling before the oldest graves, whispering names older than the town itself. Others claimed she began to lose her mind. She wrote in a hidden journal, fragments later discovered in a burned trunk, "They do not sleep, they do not weep, they only watch." In another entry, "Their eyes shine in the dark as though the darkness belongs to them." What those words meant would not be clear until decades later, when the estate was abandoned and the journals finally surfaced. By 1870, Kentucky's Reconstruction years brought federal officials into the region. The Weatherbys played hosts, offering dinners, donating to schools, ensuring their status remained untouchable. Yet even as they smiled, more disappearances plagued the area. 2 orphans vanished from a nearby parish, their beds left unmade, their belongings untouched. The town searched the woods, the rivers, even the coal shafts, but found nothing. Quiet suspicion turned toward the Weatherbys, though no proof surfaced. Still, some connected the disappearances to Eleanor's constant visits to the basement. It was believed the twins were no longer children, yet they had not aged like others. They remained in shadow, growing only stranger. What James promised the churchman who tolerated him was simple: funding, land, influence. What he demanded in return was silence. And silence was granted, even as families buried empty coffins, even as mothers whispered of something unnatural moving through the night. What no one in the town knew was that the Wetherby family had long carried whispers of old European bloodlines. Their ancestors had left England not for opportunity, but for exile. There were records, though scattered, of marriages between cousins, brothers and sisters, done to preserve not just wealth, but something older, a knowledge, a belief that their line carried a gift or a curse. The twins in Kentucky were not the first deformed children in the Weatherby name. In Virginia, a boy had been born without a mouth, living only 7 days. In Maryland, a girl whose spine bent backward died before baptism. Each child had been erased from family records, and the Weatherbys had grown skilled at hiding their shame. But in Kentucky, the line faltered. The twins lived, and in living, they began to demand things no family ledger could conceal. By the late 1870s, locals spoke of the watchers in the woods. Hunters claimed to glimpse figures pale as bark, moving just beyond torchlight. Some swore these figures whispered in broken tones, repeating prayers half remembered from church. The sheriff dismissed such claims, until one morning when his own daughter awoke with scratches across her chest, and the name Eleanor carved faintly into her door. The Weatherby house was watched more closely then, but no arrests were ever made. Those who questioned James openly soon lost their farms, their loans called in by banks he controlled. Resistance was crushed not by law, but by the invisible hand of influence. Meanwhile, Eleanor withdrew further into silence. Servants reported hearing her weep in empty hallways, murmuring, "They want more. They will not stop." Her health withered, but James grew only more resolute. To him, the twins were proof that the Weatherbys were chosen. Chosen for what no one dared ask. The turning point came with a fire. In 1881, smoke rose from the Weatherby estate, flames clawing at the night sky. Neighbors rushed to help, but James blocked the doors, insisting the fire remain contained. Only the west wing burned, and though no lives were publicly lost, several accounts tell otherwise. One young boy later confessed in an asylum record that he had been inside that wing. He described pale hands gripping his arms, a chorus of voices chanting in unison from beneath the floor. He claimed Eleanor begged him to run, shoving him through a broken window. When asked why he hadn't burned, he whispered, "Because they do not burn. They cannot." That boy was silenced soon after, his record sealed, his name stricken from census rolls. But his words remain, preserved in a single priest's notes hidden in the diocesan archive. After the fire, the Weatherby estate became even more sealed from the outside world. Windows were bricked, doors chained, gardens left to rot. James rarely appeared in public, though Eleanor was sometimes seen wandering the churchyard at dawn, her hands covered in ash. The town grew restless, yet powerless. One diary from a schoolteacher of the era recalls, "We do not speak of the house. Children are warned not to look. It is as though the air around it is poisoned, though no one dares breathe that truth." That year, 3 children from the parish school disappeared. Their desks remained untouched, their slates still marked with chalk. Their absence was never explained. Some whispered they had been offered. Others said they had been taken below ground. What frightened townsfolk most was not the disappearances themselves, but the silence. No sermons mentioned it. No newspapers recorded it. It was as though the children had never existed at all. In 1887, Eleanor's health failed entirely. Witnesses described her as skeletal, her hair falling in patches, her skin almost translucent. She was often heard muttering verses from scripture, though twisted, backward, or incomplete. On her deathbed, she is said to have clutched the hand of a parish priest and whispered, "They will never leave, not while the blood remains." She died before dawn. Her funeral was lavish, the church bells tolling through the valley, but James refused to bury her in consecrated ground. Instead, she was interred on the estate, in a plot ringed by iron fencing. Locals noted that the twins were not seen during her funeral, though many swore they felt watched, as though eyes stared from within the trees. That sense of being observed became the defining feature of the Weatherby legacy. Even those who moved away reported the same dream. Pale children standing in the corner of a room, silently watching, never blinking. James lived on another decade, growing colder, more severe. He rarely spoke, but when he did, he often invoked destiny. His writings, later uncovered, are filled with cryptic lines. They are not deformed. They are evolved. Their bodies bend to house what cannot be seen. He built underground chambers beneath the estate, hiring men who soon vanished once the work was done. Some believed he was creating a crypt for Eleanor. Others feared it was a sanctuary for the twins. Whatever the truth, by 1895, the Weatherby property had become a prison of secrets. The town's population declined. Families fled, saying they would rather face poverty elsewhere than live under the shadow of that house. By the turn of the century, the Weatherbys were the only family left with power. Yet within those walls, the legacy of incest, ambition, and whispered worship was festering into something the valley would never recover from. The 20th century arrived with promises of progress, but in the Weatherby Valley, time moved differently. In 1903, surveyors for a new railway line entered the area. What they reported disturbed even hardened men. One foreman wrote that when his crew camped near the estate, they heard singing, though no words I knew. Another claimed he awoke to find small handprints pressed into the fabric of his tent, though no child had been present. Work crews began quitting one by one until the line was abandoned. The official records blame unstable ground. The truth, preserved in private letters, tells otherwise. No one wanted to cross land, guarded by things not meant for light. By then, James Weatherby had died, though not peacefully. His body was found contorted, his jaw broken, his eyes wide open as though he had seen something that stopped his heart. He was buried next to Eleanor, though some swore the ground shook when his coffin was lowered. The estate passed to distant relatives, cousins who dared not live there. Instead, the house fell into decay. Windows shattered, vines consumed the walls, but the basement remained locked. Locals warned outsiders to stay away, though not all heeded the warning. In 1911, 2 drifters seeking shelter vanished within its halls. Only their boots were found, neatly placed by the front door. Children dared each other to approach at night, but those who lingered too close returned pale, trembling, unable to speak of what they had seen. The Weatherby twins, if they still lived, would have been nearly 50 years old by then. Yet stories described them unchanged. Always pale, always watching. Their deformities no longer the mark of weakness, but of something that had endured beyond human time. Church leaders, embarrassed by their complicity, began destroying records. Baptismal logs disappeared. Diaries were burned. Even gravestones in the parish yard were defaced, names scratched into anonymity. The Weatherbys were to be forgotten, their legacy erased. But forgetting does not end a curse. In 1922, a missionary from Ohio claimed to have uncovered letters from Eleanor describing rituals performed in the basement. He shared them with colleagues who dismissed them as madness. Days later, he was struck by a train in broad daylight. His death was ruled accidental. The letters vanished, yet fragments resurfaced. Mentions of feeding the watchers, of blood that binds, of eyes that see through stone. These writings suggested that the twins were not simply victims of incest, but vessels of something older. Something their family had carried for centuries and had tried, through sin and secrecy, to preserve. By the Great Depression, the valley was a ghost region. Homes abandoned, schools boarded up, crops left untended. Yet still, smoke was seen rising from the Wetherby estate. Travelers passing through reported shadows in the windows, faint hymns carried on the wind, and an odor of iron that clung to the air. Local folklore turned the Wetherby twins into figures of fear, symbols of what happens when families break God's laws. But older residents spoke with less certainty. They warned that the Weatherbys had not broken laws. They had upheld something far more ancient, older than America, older than the Bible itself. They kept their vow, one widow said, and for that they will never die. In 1938, a federal survey team documented the abandoned town. Their notes describe crumbling houses, skeletal barns, and an estate that seemed untouched by time. One surveyor claimed he descended into the basement. What he wrote afterward is nearly illegible, scratched in frantic handwriting. Not human, not children. They have no age. They only wait. They know me. That man left government service immediately, later institutionalized. His superiors sealed the report, filed under irrelevant. But among his belongings after his death was a sketch. Two figures, their faces blank, their eyes enormous, their limbs twisted into impossible shapes. The drawing is dated with one word scrawled beneath it: watching. By World War II, the estate was declared unsafe and fenced off. Soldiers stationed nearby claimed they heard chants at night, though no one lived there. A chaplain assigned to the base wrote that he visited the site and felt an overwhelming pressure, as though the walls themselves were breathing. He left behind one sermon draft that reads, "The corruption of flesh is not the end. It is the beginning. They sought to become vessels, and vessels they remain." The draft was never preached. Shortly after, the chaplain was transferred overseas, where he was killed in combat. His belongings vanished into military storage, never to resurface. After 1950, the valley was flooded to create a reservoir. The government claimed it was for hydroelectric development. Locals whispered otherwise, that it was the only way to bury what could not be destroyed. The Wetherby estate, the church, the graves, all now rest beneath water. Fishermen say no fish live in that part of the lake. Divers who have descended report hearing faint voices, as though the water itself hums with sound. Some have claimed to glimpse pale shapes moving just beyond visibility, drifting slowly through the depths, waiting. The official name of the reservoir is Benign, but older maps, drawn by hand, bear a different title: The Drowned Watching. Tonight, as you hear this story, understand that it is not simply a tale of incest, or corruption, or forgotten history. It is a parable of silence. How institutions bury truths they cannot confront. How families guard legacies they should have destroyed. How entire towns conspire to forget what still lingers beneath the surface. The Wetherby twins may be myth, or they may still drift beneath the black waters of that reservoir. What matters most is not whether they were real, but what their story reveals. That power will sacrifice innocence, that silence feeds corruption, and that some bloodlines are not meant to endure. If you ever stand by that water on a still night, and you feel watched, do not look down. For the watchers do not blink. They do not sleep. They only wait.